Hi. Hi, my name is Dawn Sabala, and I am the director here at the Tulare Historical Museum, and turnout is just amazing. We're hitting our maximum occupancy level, but everybody relax. Thank you all for coming out. I would like to welcome you to our very special program today, a history and testimony of the Japanese American internment with a focus on the Tulare Assembly Center. I would like to go ahead and thank Mission Oak High School teacher, Mr. MichaelPaul Mendoza, and his cultural history class for making all of this happen. And for allowing the museum to be a part of this. It's very special. I will... Yes. I will be handing the microphone over to the class to go ahead and start their brief history presentation, Mission Oak Cultural History of the U.S. class. But before that, I have Mr. Tim Heyer of the Tulare County Superintendent of Schools. He's going to say a few words.
Thank you. What a great turnout tonight. Thank you all for being here. It's truly a pleasure to be included and asked to welcome everyone. As a previous agriculture teacher, I always believed that you gave students resources and you were their cheerleader and their supporter, and then you just had to get out of their way and they would set the world on fire. What I believe you're going to hear and see tonight is just the culmination of that. An instructor who believed in his students, gave them the resources that they need, and let them set the world on fire. So congratulations ahead of time to all of you. Thank you for doing this. It's inspirational as an educator and someone who cares tremendously about the history of Tulare County, keeping that alive and appreciating our elders. So thank you very much and congratulations.
I would like to ask the students to introduce themselves and say what grade they are in.
My name is Luke Mendez, and I just graduated from Mission Oak.
My name is Raven Borges, and I also just graduated.
Hi, my name is Michael Mendoza, and I'm going to be a junior next year.
I'm Megan Fahrenkopf, and I'll be a senior next year.
And I'm Kimberly Teixeira, and I just graduated.
Hello, we're from Mission Oak's Cultural History class, and we're here to teach you about some forgotten history that took place here in Tulare, California.
If I were to show you this picture, you might say that it evokes the Jewish Holocaust. But what if I told you that this picture was actually taken in America, of Americans, at the exact same time as the Jewish Holocaust?
As early as the 1900s, many Japanese were immigrating to the U.S. in hopes of achieving the American dream. Many settled in California and became farmers in the Central Valley. Their produce consisted of sugar beets, strawberries, and a variety of vegetables. Many were financially sound and were able to carry out their Japanese traditions.
Everything changed on December 7th, 1941, with the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. This brought great fear to the country, fear of another attack, and fear that Japanese spies had infiltrated the American public.
This also brought widespread hysteria. Many American citizens no longer trusted their Japanese American neighbors. They boycotted and vandalized Japanese American businesses, and they refused to serve Japanese Americans whom they had served for years. They made signs and slogans secluding Japanese Americans, and some harassed and verbally abused Japanese Americans on the streets.
All of the hysteria, violence, and fear was piled up until it reached Washington. Under extreme pressure, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, forcing those of Japanese descent out of their homes and into internment camps.
Entire families were forced to move. Children, parents, and grandparents. Everyone was assigned tags to be worn and strapped onto their luggage during the trip. Every Japanese American was forced to be present at an assembly center at a specific time. They were loaded onto a bus, allowed to take only what possessions they could carry, then shipped out of town away from any neighbors or friends that could vouch for their innocence. The people in this photo are from Santa Maria, and they're on their way to Tulare.
The living conditions were harsh inside these camps. They lived in temporary army barracks that could house up to 10 families crammed together. There was absolutely no privacy. These Americans were forced to eat, sleep, and use the bathroom together.
After some time in these camps, the U.S. military decided to separate out individuals who were true threats to national security. They decided to hand out a loyalty questionnaire to each individual who was interned. The questionnaire brought a lot of negative feedback into the camp, and questions 27 and 28 were in particular the most controversial of the questionnaire. Question 27 asked if individuals were willing to fight in World War II for the U.S., and question 28 asked if they were willing to renounce their loyalty to Japan and its emperor. If they answered no to both of these questions, they were sent to Tulare Lake internment camp and later deported back to Japan.
As the war raged on, it became apparent that the U.S. military needed more recruits for the war effort, and so they looked to the young Japanese American men who had checked yes on their loyalty questionnaires and encouraged them to enlist. Now, enlisting in the Army was highly controversial. For one thing, it seemed irrational to die for a country who would put your family in prison against their constitutional rights. For seconds, the living conditions within the camps were so bad that many men were pleased to leave. And for thirds, many believed that by fighting for America, they could prove that Japanese Americans were never a threat to national security. In the end, many men did join the Army, and they formed the 442nd Regiment, whose logo you see here, and they became the most highly decorated regiment of all time.
After the war was over, the Japanese American internment ended. They were released to live in any part of the country that they wanted. Some chose to move back to their West Coast homes, only to find them vandalized or another family living inside.
However, some Americans were friendly to their Japanese American neighbors. They looked after their houses and businesses while they were away.
50 years later, the government worked to make amends. They sent everyone imprisoned a sincere letter of apology and $20,000 as compensation. If your family and yourself went through the suffering, would you think this was enough to make up for being imprisoned? Other ways to make amends are by building memorials. These are just a few of the memorials built in assembly centers and incarceration camps.
This is a map of all the relocation centers and incarceration camps that were made during World War II. Now, this gray area here is known as the evacuation zone. Any Japanese American living in that area was forced out of their home and into these relocation camps. Camps were constructed in any open space, primarily away from towns and cities, but the smaller assembly centers were constructed in the middle of towns, on racetracks or fairgrounds, including the one right here at the Tulare County Fairgrounds. This is a present-day picture of the Tulare County Fairgrounds. You can see Bardsley and K Street, and you can clearly see the racetrack. But on the next picture, you can still see Bardsley and K Street and the racetrack. But now the fairgrounds is covered in temporary Army barracks. Inside these Army barracks lived Japanese American families. The camp was almost completely surrounded by barbed wire, and it stretched across Bardsley. At some points of the day, the street was closed so that inmates could walk back and forth between the two halves of the camp. I'd like to end with this picture. I'd like to ask you to close your eyes. I want you to imagine yourself in your youth, being taken out of your home, put on a train or a bus and shipped out of town away from your friends. And when you ask your family why, all they can say is, "We're Japanese." Now, opening your eyes once more, I want you to decide for yourself, does this history deserve to be remembered or forgotten? And seeing all of you here today, I think we can decide that this history deserves to be remembered. Thank you so much for being here today.